Hey, what's up, people? Welcome to the live stream. It is 100, what would it be? 118 years ago today. Sam Langford and Jack Blackburn met for the sixth time in their careers. And this was, I think, in Philly. This is National Athletic Club in Philadelphia. So it's a no decision city, meaning if they're both on their feet at the end of the fight, there's no official decision. But this fight was actually stopped in the first round, declared no contest. The ref, according at least to the Philadelphia item, uh, it looked like they weren't having a serious fight, so it was stopped. So this isn't actually the anniversary of an important fight, but these are two important guys. So, and hey, what's up, Ross Clot? I listened to the rest of that thing. Good thing you had some good takes in there, man. Interesting take on the fight, the motivation and the call out and all that. It's a good show. Yes, we're just talking about the sixth meeting between Langford and Blackburn. And Blackburn was a little bit older than Langford. They both had fantastic record. For this fight, according to BoxRec at least, including newspaper decisions, coming into this fight, Langford had 45 wins, 4 losses, and 14 draws. Those 4 losses came to, let me see, off the top of my head, Danny Duane, 1903, Dave Holly, 1904. Who else am I thinking of? Larry Temple, had he already fought Joe Jeanette? I'm going to have to pull up the graphic, actually. I shouldn't go off the top of my head yet. Appreciate you too there, Ross Cloud. I shouldn't try to go off the top of my head yet, although I have found that this is helping me keep at least these fights that I've covered so far in this series, keep them straight in my head. So let's get into this. Talking about Jack Blackburn, most known today as a trainer of Joe Louis, among other fighters, but really to the wider public, if known at all, as the great trainer of Joe Louis. He fought some dudes though, and he had some really good seasons. And just like a lot of the fighters of this era, I think of them as seasons. Why do I think of them as seasons? Well, let's take a look. Now, I went by BoxRec for these records. I didn't cross-reference with Cyberboxing Zone. I also didn't include some unverified fights that were in a 1907 almanac. The BoxRec lists under the Wikipedia page. I didn't throw them in the schedule because I haven't researched Blackburn like that. As far as that particular publication as a source, I don't know anything about it. So I left that off. Just know that Blackburn claimed to have almost a couple hundred more fights than the 100 and whatever, 170 something, I think. The BoxRec shows. A lot of no decisions. He fought out of Philly a lot, and that was a no decision city. So the difference, if you go to BoxRec and look at the top of the page, look at his official record, but then scroll down to the fight by fight listing. Right above that, they'll show you how many actual fights they had if you count the no decision bouts, where you could win by a knockout, but if it went the distance, there was no official result. So this right here, the color coding counts the newspaper decisions. Yeah, and I didn't know about. Oh, that's very cool, Ross. Yeah, and I didn't know about him. I didn't know who he was until hearing Hardline and Scrapbook talk about it. I didn't have a clue. Like Jack Blackburn, I'm just learning so much in this last few years. So let's see here. Yeah, so you see 1900, 01, 02, and he might have had a lot more fights than this. Some of the fights that were referenced in that almanac were most of them from these years, and I think also 03. They were around to different cities. Cincinnati was one of them and stuff. So he may well have been traveling around kicking a lot more butts than what we see here. But what we do see here is an absence of defeat. Blackburn's getting his stuff. Some of these are, I mean, you can see they're in 02. So he stops Kid Stevens in 2, but then he fights Steve Crosby. I got a typo there. I got a 4 in there for no reason at all. 3, 4, 5 fights in a row scheduled for 10. The last fight of the year scheduled for 15. Who knows how long that Otis Southers fight was supposed to go. He's putting in some rounds, and he's known to be extremely clever, great jabber, had a great hook, defensive master, but also he could move, he could switch up his approach. 1903, you see he has a spectacular 1903, marred only by 6-round newspaper decision loss to Dave Holly. Dave Holly's actually up on the Hall of Fame ballot this year, interestingly. as is young Peter Jackson. I got to look at the whole thing. I should have done a graphic with the. Maybe I'll do a whole show on that. But someone tweeted out the Hall of Fame ballot for the old timers, and I was like, "Yo, Dave Holly deserves to be in there. He fought some seasons." So actually, they should put Blackburn in as a fighter. But so is 1903. You can see he has a great year. The final fight he has that year, he's already gotten the best of the great Joe Gans. But Dave Holly gets the best of him. Dave Holly actually had a really competitive fight with Joe Gans the day before Joe Gans fought Sam Langford. These guys all intermingle heavily. And this is like a real burst, you know. Blackburn fights Gans, Holly fights Gans, Gans fights Langford, and now Holly and Langford don't fight till the following year. But and now Blackburn's going to fight Langford. I think I made a graphic specifically for that fight. This is before I thought of the series, and I was just going to go do some key fights. Blackburn gets the best of this fight. All three Boston papers is a prearranged draw. Langford's people apparently insisted on the prearranged draw, so they were protecting him from a potential loss on his record. I guess following the win over Gans, maybe they were trying to preserve the shine. Whatever it was, Blackburn was taller than Langford. I think he's around 5'10" or 5'9" and change. Langford had the long arms, but Blackburn was like a pretty rangy guy. He got the best in the majority of rounds. He didn't win every round, but he definitely came out. He would have gotten the decision. The crowd was apparently upset that there wasn't a decision rendered. I'm not sure, because maybe that messes up people's bets. I'm not sure the specifics. I'll get into that in December when we go into this fight in super depth. I'm only mentioning it now because one, I made this graphic and I really like this graphic of these guys. Langford's a little bit older in this photo, but that picture, the two pictures of Blackburn on this are from 1904. No, I'm sorry. The one in the center bottom is 1903. The one on the right, I think, is from 1904 preview for one of his fights with Langford. So that was their first meeting. Let me pull 1903 back up. So Blackburn caps off a year. Holly gets a little bit the best of him, but it's not an official decision. But he's the first guy since Joe Gans won the lightweight title. He's the first guy to get the best of Gans at all, even though it's over 6 rounds and no decision bout. And then he gets the best of Langford in spirit. So Blackburn's the hot shit, basically, coming into 1904. Danny Duane's making some big claims coming into 1904 because he got the best of Langford the same year that Langford beat Gans. And beating Gans is just insane at this time. I mean, in 04, Gans moves up to welterweight and fights the great Barbados Joe Walcott, the welterweight champion, and they fight to a draw. So, I mean, Gans was serious. He wasn't just like stuck at lightweight. Same with Blackburn. In 1904, Blackburn is a welterweight. So is Sam Langford. Gans is moving up and down, but he does fight at welter, as he had already. And Dave Holly is at welter. In fact, in 04, the welterweight champion, Barbados Walcott, shot himself in the hand accidentally a little while after he had fought. Not that day, but like maybe a couple weeks after he'd fought Gans in what turned out to be a non-title fight. But they'd fought to a draw. Holly and Langford had fought on the other coast to a draw. They were supposed to be deciding who's going to challenge the winner. There were no winners on either side, but they then Barbados Walcott shot himself, and then you had a couple fighters claiming white welterweight championships, and then Langford's manager posted forfeit money with I think it was the Boston Globe, with Rob Roy of the Boston Globe, and claimed the American welterweight championship for Langford. Blackburn wanted to fight. He was still trying to get the fight with Gans. He wanted to fight at the limit, like the lightweight limit, so the title would be on the line. But he was also a factor at welter. In the preview for one of his fights with Langford, they billed him as welterweights. And in fact, I don't know if I made a graphic, but the writer said that was the best fight booked nationally that week. Yeah, let me pull this up. Why not? Oh, my live banner is covering up, but it basically says the most important boxing match this week is the Highland AC of Marlborough, Sam Langford of Cambridge, and Jack Blackburn of Philly meet in a 15-round engagement. This isn't this fight, of course, but it says at the end. Well, actually, at the very end, interestingly, so many Boston fans have applied for membership in the Marlboro Club that manager McCabe has arranged unusual conveniences for those who wish to see the contest. Special cars will leave Marlboro for Boston after the bout, and there will be accommodations for as many as come. So that's epic. They're renting train cars and stuff, hiring specials to carry some extra people. Very cool indeed. But you see up higher, so it says the match is more than usually important because it is part of the weeding out process that will eventually determine Joe Walcott's successor for the welterweight championship. It is practically conceded that the shooting accident which injured the Black Demon's right hand will necessitate his retirement. Of all the candidates for the title, Langford and Blackburn stand among the highest. Honey Melody and Buddy Ryan carefully qualified their claims by calling themselves white welterweight champions. Langford has drawn with Walcott and beaten Joe Gans. Gans has drawn with Walcott. In two previous meetings, Langford has drawn with Blackburn in 12 rounds and outpointed him in a 6-round no decision bout at Philly. Now, the other records I've seen about that bout in Philly, I'm pretty sure that it's a draw, or maybe BoxRec has it as a draw. Let's have a look. Let me find the Philly one. Washington Social Club in Philly. A draw from the Philadelphia item, which noted it was a light hitting affair. The Inquirer and the Record. So maybe that's just the writer just putting a little hype on the thing, or maybe he was there and that was his opinion. But because I'm pretty sure this excerpt's from the Globe. It's either the Globe or the Post. Those guys would go to the fights. They were writing the round by rounds on some of the larger fights, which is usually a good indicator that they were actually there if they're giving you the proper details and not just talking about the results. But anyway, I'm getting myself distracted. Let's see who's in the comment here. They should have been on the ballot. But it was nice to see Dave Holly on there and young Peter Jackson. These are guys that also deserve. I'd like to see George Cole in there. I mean, there's some other guys. In fact, George Cole this year, I guess I should keep going through I'm distracting myself. I wasn't even going to do a very long one. My battery's on like 22%, so we'll see how far we get. Pull up the main graphic while I queue up this stuff. So we traveled through Blackburn's early years, and obviously there could be a ton of fights, but not major fights, but a ton of fights, ton of experience in this time that's just not on the record or not reported or verified or just wasn't important enough to be, or it was in private in a state where you weren't supposed to be boxing. Obviously, you're not going to go tell the newspaper man you're breaking the law, because this was a time when people would get arrested after fights at times, depending on the jurisdiction. So it was a real thing. Like, people aren't making up saying there are a lot of fights off the books. Like a lot of it needed to be off the books in this time. So as rich as the sport was, there was a lot more happening than this, which is insane. Very dangerous. But these guys were real hard, man. It was already a hard life, hard blue collar life at that time. So it got harder if you're in the craft. Moving into 1904, so Blackburn, he's just got the best of, Gans in November, lose the newspaper decision to Holly at the end of November, but then he gets the best of Langford in the prearranged draw. And a lot of the papers, even though it was a prearranged draw, out nationally, a lot of the papers just reported that Blackburn got the best of it because the local papers, the Boston papers, had all made that very clear. So Blackburn himself and his people were saying, "Hey, and the writers were saying, well, has Joe Gans gone back? It's either that or Sam Langford and Jack Blackburn are incredibly special," which turned out to be true. But going into 1904, you see Blackburn, Jimmy Gardner, beginning of the year, that's a good win. Draws with Sam Boland, draws with Langford in January. A couple more wins. No contest with Danny Duane. It's alternately been reported as a win for Duane, but he claimed a foul and went down, got hit while he was down. And I think the ref had said that basically there was no decision given. They waved the fight off basically in the chaos. Then he loses to the great Joe Gans, gets a 15-round fight with him, loses on points, comes back with a big string of wins, including getting the best of Dave Holly in a no decision bout in August. And then at the very end of the year, why not? Yet another draw with Sam Langford. Moving into 1905, this photo here of Blackburn's a little bit later in his career. I don't think he had the knife scar, the knife wound scar on his cheek yet in 1905. I'm not certain, but that's a later picture of him. I just like that picture. So he looks ice cold in that one. So we're going to use it. 1905. So you see, he has a string of success at the beginning of the year. He loses newspaper decision to George Cole. Let me pull George Cole. Here's a photo I found in the paper of George. Very good fighter indeed. So Blackburn gets the worst of it in a newspaper decision. No shame in that, though. Cole was fantastic. Gets one over Jack Williams. Draws with Larry Temple. Larry Temple was among other things, a rival of Barbados Joe Walcott. Fought for challenged him for the welterweight title. And this year, Temple actually gets the best of Langford. They had a series of fights, but it's one of two losses Langford suffers this year. I'll go ahead and pull up his 05. So he loses to Temple in Marlborough, Massachusetts, July 4th. But then December 25th, he loses to the great Joe Jeanette. He gets TKO'd in Lawrence, Massachusetts. There's a picture from the preview in the I think the Globe, but in one of the Boston papers. This was the preview article for the fight with Langford. That photo of Jeanette on the left's in that. So that's at the latest a 1905 photo of Joe Jeanette, pretty young, babyface Joe. And that Langford photo's from, I think, no later than the end of 03. That's when I saw it in the paper, but possibly earlier in 03. And I have a feeling this picture center top of Langford is from 02. Let me get rid of the text. I think that one's because he looks a little bit younger in that, unless it's just a trick of the light. But he's still pretty baby faced in 03 there. But anyway, I was talking about Larry Temple. So he draws with Temple. Temple fought a bunch of different dudes. I saw this online. I see that picture on the left. It's listed as Blackburn. It does kind of look like him from the side, showing off some technique there. Very cool. I hadn't seen that until recently. It's awesome. There's Temple on the right. That's just cropped from that other one. Langford also fought Temple. Like I said, he lost here. He got it back. I think it was early 06. He got it back. He stopped Temple. And as their series went on between Langford and Temple, it went more and more Langford's way. After it's not, yeah, that's probably fair enough to say. By the end of it, Langford was smacking him around. But in 05, hey, it's a different story. And Langford actually has like a no contest with George Cole that year. I'm not sure the full details. We'll get to that in March. I'll research it for March because I'm going to do the no contest. Just like this October 7th, it's an anniversary of a fight that was stopped. Now I've got NC4 there for some reason, but I feel like it didn't go that long. This graphic right here I made probably a year ago, so I wonder if something changed on the information. Because I think that on BoxRec, at least, that Danny Dwayne fight with Blackburn changed from a loss to a no contest over the last year or two in their records. I have to stick a pin in that. I'll just have to look at it after the fact. I was kind of rushing to get all of these made up, so I don't know. Oftentimes you'll see some typos in there. I apologize in advance. So Blackburn's 05, multiple fights with Temple. He has this no contest with Langford. He also loses to Langford on points. So in their series, this one that we're celebrating the anniversary of the fight that barely happened. This was the sixth time. So 4 of the other 5 had gone to a draw. Although the first time they met, Blackburn won in spirit. Officially a draw, but he won in spirit. But the 4th time they met, Langford actually won on points. So Blackburn was that good. Langford was winning a ton of fights. And it was rare for someone to get the best of him. And especially you think of the Shocker where Blackburn's able to best him, win the majority of the rounds right after Langford beats Joe Gans. And he beat Joe Gans soundly. Like the description of the Gans fight, they wasn't close. They were, by midway through the fight, they're like, "Oh shoot, Gans is gonna need a stoppage." You know, it was that kind of fight where they're like, "He's not gonna, he can't make up the points." Well, let me check the comments here. Oh, what's up, Antonio? 3 fights a month. It is crazy. Activity levels absolutely insane, right? And this might be just the tip of the iceberg. We don't, like, I'd seen written, not a direct quote, but some I'd seen written that Blackburn claimed to have almost 400 fights. So, you know, having 100 and whatever 70, I forget how many BoxRec has for him, 170 maybe, give or take. That's a tremendous amount, but he could have had way more. Maybe not important ones, but all that experience does count. And he was brilliant, so it had to come from somewhere. But he certainly, you know, obviously he also made the most out of who he was fighting. He's fighting some good people, like fighting George Cole, Larry Temple, Sam Langford, you know, multiples with Langford and Temple all in the same year. Like, come on. That's wild stuff. And Langford as well, you know, like fighting, even going up and fighting, you know, future great Joe Jeanette in '05. He has no business in there with Jeanette. I mean, he does get stopped, so, but he's not really like ready for that, but he still makes the jump, you know, because by '05, Langford was making quite a few fighters wary of him, especially people his own size, and certainly the most of his former opponents, not all, but most of his former opponents from down at lightweight, they weren't having a lot of fun if they got in there at all. This might be the last. I suppose '06 might be the transition year for Langford, where he sort of leaves behind anyone who isn't middleweight or above. At least that I can think of off the top of my head. Yeah, exactly, Antonio. 400 plus fights. I mean, it's a lot of fights, but you know, it was like we're talking about exceptional characters at a time when so many people wanted to go into this thing that the pool of willing, tough guys who were able and willing to like learn and join the craft was massive. The structural strength of the sport, all the different clubs across, especially across the U.S., was gigantic. Just innumerable athletic clubs, and it was also like fighting was more popular. People would just be fighting. Pretty easy to set up a fight and bet on it, you know, even without a club. So these guys were exceptionally excellent among all of this fierce competition. So yeah, these guys were crazy, but these are the guys who could keep the seasons going. Like I was saying on the show, one of the last shows, the Jeanette anniversary, like Langford, this is years later. Look, he's still going season, season. And it just keeps going. Season. You think, can he possibly do more? Of course he can. You can fast forward another 6 years and he has even more fights than that in 1920 when he's, look at this. What the hell? That's insane. That's insane. Blackburn, he had a lot too, and he was locked for I think maybe 4 or 5 years. He was locked up. So imagine how many fights he probably had a few in jail too. But like, imagine how many fights he could have had if he had stayed out. Like Blackburn was special, and as a guy with a lot of defensive skill, he's also someone who may not have taken as much damage as other guys. Some of these battlers, they don't have long careers. They're exciting, but they don't have long careers. They take a lot. Whereas someone like Blackburn and even Langford had a chin. He did rely on it somewhat at times, but he also had the skill. He wasn't like trying to get hit unless he was clowning someone he already had the measure off. But you know, Langford definitely took more damage than Blackburn, but he wasn't as defensive a stylist, and he also wasn't as like long like Blackburn not had to use his height as well as his reach. So anyway, so we have Blackburn, you know, having a pretty good year, not undefeated season, but you know, setback to George Cole and Langford, and then some draws with you know, Temple, Langford, Jack Williams. That was just a 6 rounder. That was a no decision anyway. Draws again with Temple, so pretty good year. Langford's year, also not without setbacks. And just to rewind, just to remind, because this will come up all the time. I'm getting more and more graphics made up. I need to sort of double check for errors and keep going. But so I'm not like having accidental stuff Like the reason there are no dates on this is actually an older one because the one I made with dates, I was off by a day on the Young Jarvis fight, the one in gray up there toward the top. The one I found, I had the 23rd instead of the 24th. I was like, well, that's not going to work. I didn't have time to fix it. So here we go. We're using this one. Eventually, I'd like to get all of them like this, where I try and get a picture of every opponent, or at least every one that I can find, either online or in the archives behind the paywall. Kind of map out the careers that way, hopefully with better font and like formatting than that. That was done very sloppily, but it's Langford's 03. One setback, massive amount of work, a moral setback against Jack Blackburn, sort of in spirit. But really, the glow of the Gans fight was massive. Going into 04, less fights, but the schedule is tougher fight to fight. A lot more of these opponents are very dangerous. Some repeat customers, but also you're talking about a real escalation where you take on someone like Holly or Walcott. That's serious stuff. As in Barbados Walcott, the larger, more formidable Walcott brother. He'd already fought Belfield. He fought him this year as well, but no, Barbados Walcott was the man, the top welter in the world. So Langford fighting him a year after, not too long after he'd beaten, so that was in September. So that's what, like 9 months after he'd beaten Joe Gans, he's fighting the great of his era at the next weight above. Just go ahead. Why not? Why not indeed? So that's Langford's 04, and then going into 05, he beats Joe Reed, George Gunther, Belfield Walcott. That was a no decision. Gets Dave Holly on points, so he avenges the 04 loss to Dave Holly. Then the no contest with George Cole, George Gunther again. Gardus Hyde, 2 fights, 2 wins over young Peter Jackson, who's a very serious guy. He should probably be in the Hall of Fame. He's up this year, so maybe let's see how many votes he gets. Then Larry Temple gets the best, but then Langford does get the win over Blackburn. Finally gets a win over him before going back to the draw. Blackburn was seriously good, even though Langford was a terror. Already by 05, some of the writers seem to think he's like among the very best for his size, like among anyone. By 06, they're pretty certain of it. And then beyond that, he just becomes this sort of mythical figure because of his ability relative to his size. Just like Joe Walcott, but he's a bigger version of Walcott. So he's actually viable at heavyweight. Whereas Walcott he was serious, but there were, like, if you gave him Langford's heavyweight schedule, it'd be a little bit different because he was only like 5'1" and naturally lighter. So Langford was just a larger version of Barbados Walcott. So when he went up to heavyweight, he was tearing people apart. So pretty good seasons. I didn't even expect to go this long, seeing as the fight barely even happened. Let me see, Antonio. Not just tough, but skilled. You have to be pretty skilled to have 60 fights, 100 fights, 40. Most of the damage is key. That's right. The right angles, the right training, and the right technique, but the angles so that you're landing with effect. You're not punching people in the elbows if you can avoid it. You're not punching the top of the head if you can avoid it. Because these are smaller gloves. I'm pretty sure these are like 4-ounce gloves at this time. And there's no mouthpiece yet. So, like, as far as like a proper one, so, little piece of orange peel or something, it's a little bit different. So, yeah, you need to be skilled. But these guys acquire the skill. How do they acquire the skill? Well, in Langford's case, and probably Blackburn too, although not all of his appears to be on the record. Excuse me. But there's how Langford got the skill. You fight that kind of schedule. Blackburn, once he got to like, what would it be, like 03? What was his first busy year? Yeah, 1903. Blackburn does the same, although he might have already been doing it. Like the way this season looks, if he was fighting in jurisdictions where either it wasn't reported or it was a good idea not to report it, these seasons here could have looked just like this one. And just like this one. And just like this one. We don't know. I don't know if I'll ever even. I might go my grave not being done researching Langford, but I would like to try and do some other research. Blackburn seems like an interesting cat to try and dig deeper on. Maybe I'll get to that. I'm trying to stay focused on the Langford project, though, for the time being. But just we should keep in mind that this kind of schedule here, this may not have been all the fights he had that year. He might have had twice that. We don't actually. It's hard to say how busy some of these guys were in private, behind the scenes, or just in at venues that it didn't end up getting reported for whatever reason. Because in the small towns that didn't necessarily have a daily newspaper, right? So if the weekly roundup, if it just escapes the attention of the writer, then maybe. So like I found in the Revere Journal, I found the about a smoke talk, a night of basically multimedia entertainment, including fights at this one in the Revere Journal. But it was that weekend's version. It wasn't like the day after, like I found in the Boston paper. So things do slip through the cracks. That's like I guess that's all I'm saying. So this could be way more epic, and who knows? Maybe in 10 years, people will have found a lot more, and these seasons will actually officially be um, that level of epic. But either way, this is a ton of fights, ton of success. A little bit of setback against Dave Holly. No shame in that, especially as Dave Holly was a 6 round specialist. Fought longer fights, but Dave Holly was one of the top operators across 6 rounds. That's in the papers. They knew him as that. And sometimes questions about, okay, so what happens if he's doing more long fights? But over 6 rounds, Holly was serious. Gave Gans a good fight and got the best Blackburn. But Blackburn was serious in that, another Philly, they're both Philly fighters. So at this time, if you were fighting in the Philly clubs mostly, you're used to this. And maybe that favors finishers because then you do get an official decision. So like the people who are only paying attention to the writers in the press who differentiate between no decisions and things, they don't talk about who won in spirit or from the papers. They just talk about official decisions. If you're a knockout artist, then you're fighting in no decision states like Langford. You can get finishes. They can become part of your official record, quote unquote. So Blackburn, not as much of a finisher. Holly, not as much of a finisher, but these guys could crack. And you see some of the stoppages Blackburn had were in no decision fights. So there was a way you could get. That's why I do count them, even if you have to sort of kind of weigh what the different papers are saying, and it takes a little bit more. But I do count them because they were legit fights, and it wasn't like there was some rule that you don't fight hard. In fact, for some fighters, if they're trying to build up their official record, they want that stoppage. They got to turn it on, and because it's only 6 rounds, they can. It's like Holly was fierce over 6. Langford fought all different lengths of fights later in his career. A lot of long fights, at least with people he could get to take them against him. Guys like Langford, Jeanette McVeigh, a lot of guys didn't want to take him on in a long fight. So maybe they could get 6 rounds like Langford with the great Stanley Catchell. Who was great, but his people would only agree to 6 round bout with Langford in a no decision city. So I think it was in Philly. So as long as they didn't get finished, he wasn't going to get knocked out. There was going to be no dispute about Ketchell's title or anything like that. I read somewhere there's a rumor that Langford was threatened not to finish Ketchell, but I can't remember if I read that in Claymore's book or where I read that. So I won't amplify that other than just mentioning that I seem to remember reading that. Maybe an account of Langford's or an account of someone saying Langford told them that. It depends, start to get some chain of separation. It's hard to know what's reliable and what isn't. But with these records, some guys like take Larry Temple, right? Beats Langford at a time when Langford is doing tremendously well, right? Fights Blackburn to a draw at a time when a lot of guys can't even get the draw with Blackburn. They can't get, certainly on a win, can't get the draw. Temple doesn't have like a great numerical record, but if you go look at his fight schedule on BoxRec, he was thrown in pretty much in the deep end. He's fight some world-class talent very quickly in his career, and so he doesn't have as many fights as guys like Langford and Blackburn packed in. but he was in some battles and he gave a good account of himself in some battles when he challenged Walcott. At least one of their fights, Walcott was a really good battle, and it was very close. Like the round count was very close. I think, I haven't studied all of their fights, but certainly one of them. I'm not sure if it's this one, but he did get the win over Langford in '05, which is an epic win. Although Langford got revenge within some months, Langford got it back. But that's how Sam Langford do. That's no knock on Larry Temple. Guy was legit. Blackburn was, of course, mega legit. It's just tough, man. When you fight a tough schedule, someone's got to lose these fights. If you don't go to a draw, someone has to lose these fights. So that's why you see a lot of pretty records in boxing, even to today, or especially today. But then they start fighting top operator after top operator, and someone's got to lose them. Suddenly, half those guys aren't undefeated anymore. Like Spence Crawford, so now obviously the one guy won, and they were like, okay, on the night they fought, the one guy was clearly better, but so now the other guy's not undefeated. Yeah, sure, that ticks off some of his fans. They can't brag they can't celebrate the undefeated aspect of him. Real fans just stay. They just, you ride your guy all the way down. If you're a real supporter, you support him against adversity, including not being as good as before. But it's okay to not be undefeated. Like, put those guys today again in some of these kind of schedules, or the modern equivalent of, say, that Langford's 1905. They're not gonna go undefeated either. And jumping up one weight class today is tough. That's not just because it's not because it's like so much tougher today. It's not necessarily any easier today either, but going up in weight is tough. Fighting bigger and bigger guys is tough. That's why you see games with rehydration clauses, or when the weigh-in's going to be, or someone fighting the smaller fighter instead of fighting the top challenger at their own weight. That's because the size does generally count, especially if someone doesn't have compensating power. Langford stood out because he did have compensating power. Guys like Blackburn and Greb, who fought above their own weight, didn't necessarily have the same cracks, so more decisions, they moved up. Langford is an anomaly. As he moved up, his power got bigger. His placement, I guess, was so superb. So that's an awful lot of talking for a fight that's bothering me now. I wonder if I have an old screenshot of the BoxRec thing where I can see if it changed over time. Because when I had no contest 4, that's probably from BoxRec, unless that's what Cyber had. Maybe that's what it is. I have to research that. Obviously not for the anniversary because we're on the anniversary, but I'll try and find out for the next time Blackburn and Langford fight. When I do that talk, I'll recap over this and have some more information and whatnot. I think that's probably enough for this talk, considering they barely fought, and it wasn't a. Although, to be clear, the newspaper saying that it was called off because it was obvious they were faking might have just meant they were both banged up and they weren't really going into a tear up. You see, they both fought a lot of rounds, and the ref might have interpreted that, and then that becomes what people say was happening. But it's hard to know what's going on with guys. We might find out from Charlie. He might say, "Oh, I was hurt for that fight. That's why it looked the way it did." Some people won't believe it. It might get reported some way or another. So it's hard to say exactly what happens, but certainly they got, for one reason or another, they weren't having a real tear up, and so it got stopped. But some of the refs are really harsh on the boxers, so think about what they're going through fighting these schedules, and then you're expected to really go to war. Because they'd even threaten to not pay you. I don't know if they got paid that night, but there were instances where the refs you guys aren't, this isn't the kind of fight we want. There's no fight and there's no pay. Or they'll withhold the pay while they're investigated over an agreement and stuff. Let's see. Rusclaw says it should be easier now since the guys rehydrate to a heavier weight. They should be more comfortable moving up in weight. It's harder back then because you really fought a bigger guy. Yeah, that's a good point. I think also in the smaller gloves, the size differential, the amount of in MMA, the power difference is, I feel, will be arguably bigger in the punching because they're only using 4-ounce gloves. There's less padding. I mean, it does mean that you risk your hands a little more, but but properly wrapped and stuff like that. There's just a lot more crack. You can get a lot more pounds per square inch. The power doesn't get like sort of like pushed out through the padding as much. So they're a different design, of course, and make gloves than these old school ones, but at least from this era. But yeah, moving up, man, you're fighting the larger guys, and they can really get you. They can really they can really crack if they, and if you don't have like a proper, because now they have like a gum shield. So if you didn't even have like a gum shield, you could put something in your mouth to protect your teeth a little bit, but you don't have like the fitted thing that you can. Everything's just like molded in. That's definitely going to make things a lot harder having to deal with various things, but especially that. The different gloves. I doubt the surface of the gloves was very gentle on the face, so to speak. Oh, hey, thanks, realist. Good to see you here. Oh man, I would love for someone to write a book about Blackburn. I don't think I have it in me. This Langford book has become highly like self-consuming. But who knows? I'm sure the first one is the toughest. Well, Claymore told me that like I guess the Langford book was his first one, I believe. Hey, thanks, Surrealist. That's a great compliment. I appreciate you joining in. I'm trying to make it a little more regular. It might be that I just do 9:30 start times for these each day, schedule permitting. It's a little tough. I've managed so far to do the anniversary day for the what was it, the 28th, 29th, the 30th, the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, the 6th, and now today. Let me see. Okay, so let me see, challenge myself. Let me see if off the top of my head I can think of the order of the fights we did. So on the 28th, we did Langford and Dixie Kid, 1909. On the 29th, I feel like it was one of his fights with young Peter Jackson. The third fight with young Peter Jackson, that would be 1905. Then the 30th was one of his fights with either McVeigh and Jeanette. And then the first was one of his fights with either McVeigh and Jeanette. I forget which switch. Third was another fight with Jeanette. I'm slipping. I don't quite have it in my head. I have been up all night at work. Yeah, I don't know if that's accurate about Tito because he's often full of shit, as is Dana White. Um, and in Dana's case, as a job, his job is to be a lightning rod and be full of shit. I'm not sure where the gloves. I could probably find out who approved the initial gloves, but I'm going to look into that. I feel like that's something I would have heard if he was instrumental in that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's a story that's been told. So much of the Zuffa myth, which is what the old school fans call the UFC propaganda, Zuffa being the holding company. Lots of the Zuffa myth is entirely made up and designed only to minimize the influence of the rest of mixed martial arts for the UFC, like the hardcores who don't pay attention. So they believe what everything they hear. That's just that's how that goes, and not my job to fight it. Although I would like to maybe dig and try and find out the actual circumstances around the gloves. Because I mean, they're designed. I've seen pictures on Twitter of like ancient gloves for combat that were similar to these gloves. So someone obviously, or it's just maybe the sensible way to construct them around the hand. But yeah, it seems small. I think it was like Roman gladiatorial gloves that looked very similar. See, now you got me wondering this, man. I'm gonna have to look that up. Pull Blackburn back up, and eventually I'll have enough graphics. Like as I get a little bit more organized, learn how to do this, I can. I'll be able to flip open the. Like I'd like to be able to like say we're talking about 1905 of a fight. I'd like to be able to pull up Jeanette's 1905 and some of other like Langford's other rivals, like all for that year. But it would be prohibitively time consuming to do that for each of these fights. But for the bigger fights, I am going to have like a wider array of graphics. I'm working to escalate a little bit, like stuff like this, going back to my clippings and finding that just I just have a lot more stuff than I have time to go dig through. It was very gratifying. Like that, I hadn't seen that picture of Blackburn until I saw it in the paper. I hadn't personally seen it. Not to say that it wasn't out there. That picture of George Cole, I hadn't seen that one until I saw it in the paper. I had to grab that for sure. That's actually one of my favorite pictures I've quote unquote found or discovered, at least to my perception. Absolutely love it. That's a kick-ass sweater too. So perhaps I've rambled long enough. We talked about way more way more fights than this little no contest would suggest was necessary. But Langford's 03, Langford's 04. Holy cow. That's a really tough year. I'm telling you folks, that is a for his first year as a welterweight, that is a really tough schedule. That includes one of the greatest welterweights that ever lived, Joe Walcott. But also fighting Holly, who was a lightweight moving up to welter. But Holly was a serious guy, man. Tons of fights, tons of fights. Holly debuted, I think it was January the 1st, 1900. He was deep in the streets by the first time he fought Langford. I'm pretty sure he had at least like maybe 80 fights by 1904 when he first fought Langford. That's not a lot of time, but I mean, you can see with Langford and Blackburn too, they were getting it on. Rouscott, I'm telling you, man, and I remember BL used to always say like his career just goes on forever. And he would do the slides, 20 fights at a time and the prominent fights within that in the slide, which is a format I love so much. And I was like, wow, this is a lot of fights. But that was even just from the highlights. He'd give the overall record, but then he'd have like the prominent opponents. Then later he did a more evolved version with even more prominent opponents. That was excellent. But now I'm studying him fight to fight. I'm like, wow, so much falls through the cracks. Like stuff like Willie Lewis, right? Stops Will Lewis in two. I mean, that was early in Lewis's career, but like considering who he went on to become, I guess he went with you know, fought in Paris. Like Lewis was like became a really serious dude, but like stopped him in two. Doesn't really come up. I mean, there's too much other stuff. Even the fights with Blackburn don't get the weight that they deserve, or the draw with Walcott, where he did get the best of it, but the ref thought the aggression made up for it, called it a draw. It was a ref's decision, even though he acknowledged Langford got the best in more rounds than Walcott did. So you can't say, oh, he beat this Hall of Famer, but he got the best of him, just like Blackburn got the best of Langford at the end of 03. So as someone who's trying to look in detail, and I'm thinking about in spirit as well as the official results, because I'm just trying to soak in the greatness, right? All these different guys' greatness. So the official results is one thing, but what actually happened in the fight is what I'm preoccupied with. And this book is going to try to address that. Book I'm trying to craft. Not just talk about the official results, but maybe talk about how the sport was reported, the standards it was held to, the conditions they fought under, the things we know we can't know regarding the schedule, the different sort of formats. For one thing I'd like to communicate in the book is all the sort of the variables and like all the different ways guys could meet, all the conditions they could meet under the different rule sets of the time. Because the US at this time was not the same as England, which was not the same as France, which was not the same as Australia. So going 02 to 06, it's like 80 something fights for Langford. I think um, not a huge percentage of his total 315 plus fight career, but all the other stuff I plan to include should be as conceived, should be a pretty hefty read, should be a lot of fun for the hardcores who are enthusiastic about learning about this time period. So it was pretty wild. It was a bit of a wild west, but it wasn't total chaos. And the guys who were reporting on it were covering it. They were even involved in some of the negotiations, holding forfeit money and stuff. So there was a responsibility the writers had, at least a large majority of the writers, to be honest about what was happening. That's why the Boston papers, all three of them, there was the Ledger, the Post, and the Globe, I think, they all, even though it was a draw with Blackburn by prior agreement or by demand of Langford's people, they all said Blackburn got the best of it. They didn't like take that as an excuse to like BS and push the hometown guy. And Langford was just beating Joe Gans. Langford was the hot stuff in Boston at that point. Well, I mean, Walcott was in Boston as well, so like obviously he's been a legend, but Langford was like he just beat one of the greats of the era. This fantastic, brilliant fighter, Joe Gans. But they still didn't take the opportunity that was there for them to be like, oh yeah, he drew with Blackburn. No, they let the people know, which helps with my research because to a certain degree, you can count on some honesty, and at worst, maybe certain omissions rather than like outright fabrications. I did find a preview for the Langford Gans bout that omitted Langford's loss to Danny Dwayne in a major paper, and I was like, oh, you forgot to put that one in, huh, guys? So it's not infallible, and I don't take it all any of it as gospel, but just trying to figure out what's to the best of my ability, find out what was happening, or what seems to have been happening. And maybe if time permits, maybe I will have to research Blackburn, his early years more heavily, simply because he was one of Langford's key early career rivals, and so I'm definitely going to be writing multiple chapters about their rivalry. So I should know more about him. But, I don't know if Jack Blackburn was part of the murderers row. I mean, he wasn't. Not if we're talking about like the heavyweight murderers row at the time, because I think that was more like McVeigh, Jeanette, uh, Langford. I guess Johnson until he finally got his shot. Although there wasn't too much like Johnson's prime leading up to getting a shot. Like he hit his prime earlier than they did, so like they were becoming the best expression of their abilities when Johnson became the champ and was obviously no longer in the murderers row because he was the guy perpetuating the murderers row by not fighting them. But Blackburn was certainly in the scene. I guess he trained, it wasn't just Joe Louis and sometime with Jersey Joe Walcott, like I said, George Godfrey and some other guys that he helped. But like as far as Joe Louis, like one of the perfect fighting machines, and just just a wonderful conflagration of genius where you have this guy with Blackburn level experience who's in the position to train this natural puncher, but like this potential great in Lewis at a time when maybe the memory of the 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 seeming chaos to the general public of Jack Johnson's title reign faded enough in the public memory. Things were somewhat changing that a guy like Lewis could get a shot, and everything came together. So it wasn't just that Lewis was great; it was that he had an opportunity to prove he was great to the wider public in less fights than what like Langford, Jeanette, McVeigh had to do to prove it when they couldn't get the world, like to unify the titles to get that shot. But Lewis got it, and so to go from Blackburn and all of his experiences, hooked up with Lewis and got Lewis to a world title, to eventual shot and everything like that. It's just incredible. And Lewis, from what I'd read, he was instructed like you got to take it easy, man. You can't be gloating about the wins. You got to go along to get along if you want to overcome this hurdle and get the shot. So a lot went into that. It wasn't just being a great fighter. Blackburn was one of these great fighters who didn't get the opportunities that his abilities and his accomplishments should have produced for him. But it's also some things of timing, like when Walcott got hurt in '04, that screwed up welterweight. Because now you have a couple guys claiming a white championship, and then the other guys have to fight each other to sort of like settle the claim. And Walcott does actually come back, but they didn't know that at first. He does come back in '06, and so it gets a little bit settled, but it's kind of a mess. And so that will have affected Blackburn as well, because that was one of the weights he was viable at. And in early '04, he was still calling to fight Ganza for the lightweight title, but he was also up at welter. I think for at least one of the Langford fights, they were matched at 140 or 141. I forget what that. I think I actually made the graphic for that, didn't I? Let me pull that back up. Yeah, 142 pounds at 6 o'clock. So I'm assuming maybe they fight at 9 p.m. or something. So I have a couple hours, put a little to drink some fluids, but I'm pretty sure this is a 1904. One of the 1904 fights. I can't actually. End of 1904, early 1905. Yeah, because they're talking about Honey Melody claiming the white welterweight champion. So it was after Walcott got hurt. But anyway, as I go to other anniversaries, folks, I swear I'm going to try and be a lot more coherent. Right now, it's a little tough because I'm trying to keep the schedule. So I'm just determined to do a show. This actually was a lot ended up being a lot more involved than I initially planned. I was just going to talk for a couple minutes and then bounce out. But even though this fight became no contest, am I going to pass up an opportunity to talk about Sam Langford and Jack Blackburn? Hells no. It had to happen. I got to keep this series going. I would, maybe eventually I'll include news and events in Langford's career that weren't necessarily even fights, exhibitions, or when he left to travel somewhere. I'd have to, it would take a lot more organizing, but it is information I'll eventually need to learn by heart, or at least certainly have laid out properly in notes. So what do I want to do before I call it? I want to pull up this graphic of Blackburn because that's just awesome. That's a whole lot of Blackburn. I love that picture of him jogging across the bridge there with Joe Louis in the bottom left. And you can see Lewis wasn't a small guy, but you can see Blackburn, even as an old man, he's decently tall. I feel like I saw him listed at 5'10". I could be wrong. That would seem to be about right with Lewis. If you guys know, put in the comments. Oh, thanks, Realist. I appreciate it, man. This is a lot of fun, man. These guys were out of their minds. I'm fascinated by this. It's just a level of tough. I mean, in general, combat sports, these are very tough, driven individuals, but this time was kind of crazy, too. There's an edge of desperation and a lack of a safety net, any meaningful safety net that made this extremely volatile sport. But man, what a sport. What the work these guys were going in. I love being able to look and you see, even if I can't watch the fights, you can just, with some imagination, and you can see how much they were all fighting each other. Like if you were independently wealthy at this time, you could just travel around to all the different fights. You were in for a treat if you were in the northeast of the USA. You really were. Like 1903, imagine the 1903 tours. And actually, certain bouts were happening on the same day. So you physically couldn't do it. You couldn't go to be in Philly and Baltimore and Boston on the same night. And that did happen at times in these seasons where they just too many fights to go to. Fans would have to choose, sometimes within the same city. That happened with one of Langford's fights. There was another big fight in town the same night. The papers were just saying the patrons are going to have to figure out which one they think's the hottest. See Blackburn here. 03 fights Dave Hawley, fights Jack Twin Sullivan, Vernon Campbell, Joe Gans, Dave Hawley, and Sam Langford all in the same season. Even if you just ignore all the other fights, that's incredibly difficult. Especially as, I'm talking seasons, but really you could just put this in a giant row because December 23rd, he fights Langford, 12 rounds. But then says December 23rd, January 2nd, he's right back in there fighting 12 rounds against Jimmy Gardner, one of the Gardner brothers out of Lowell, Massachusetts. That's on the 2nd. On the 8th, he fights Sam Bolin 15 rounds to a draw. On the 11th, he fights Langford again, this time 6 rounds. January 19th, Charlie Mohall, 6 rounds. January 25th, Kid Wilson, 6 rounds. And then he takes a bit of a break, a well-earned break for the fight with Danny Duane. But if we think about that, so one fight in December, right? December 23rd, he fights Langford 12 rounds. So that's December 23rd. By January 25th, just over a month, that single fight, he's added 5 more fights. That's a month. He's added five more fights. So in a month and 2 days, he has 6 fights, which includes Jimmy Gardner and Sam Langford, and these are not all short fights. That's 27 rounds combined against Gardner and Sam Bolin, and then 6 against Langford. Just madness. And just keeps going. He gets locked, but Blackburn has some good seasons after he gets locked up. When he gets out, he just keeps on trucking. Hits the ground running, keeps it moving. Because these guys, if this was what was the best thing available to them and the difference in money between the crappy standard of living they could expect doing manual labor and what they could make boxing, even if compared to today, it doesn't seem that lavish. It certainly was then for in terms of opportunity. So these guys oftentimes, through the adversity, through the difficult stuff, things like Billy Jordan, one of Langford's 03 opponents, he got shot like 3 times and then came back within a year. Stonewall Allen, Bob Allen, who Langford fought a couple times, he got shot in the head. He didn't retire. Walcott shot himself in the hand. He was back in 2 years. Like these guys, they had to get it on. Partly out of desperation, but I admire what they did, even if it came out of desperation. Same thing, like if someone's a hero in wartime, whether they're a conscript or volunteer, you just that's heroics, that's bravery. So that's the way I see this fighting stuff. If a guy's got money, I also admire if you got money, you don't have to fight. You want to go compete on that level. That's pretty badass. But it's also badass if you have no choice, or that this is your one opportunity to climb out, to claw your way out of poverty. And then we can celebrate him now just for having done some heavy duty things. This is a great period for martial arts as far as, there was some mixed rule stuff and different rule sets, but for the fistic craft, this is such an important time. Hey, what's up, Joseph? Yeah, man, Chappie versus Bone Crusher Sam, although this particular one, October 7th, 1905, was they got made a no contest. I guess they weren't fighting hard enough for the ref. Either it was actually they were putting on a pantomime, they weren't like going for it, or it wasn't to his standard. I haven't really dug super deeply on this particular fight. I wasn't sure if I was going to do it, and I was like, well, how can I not do it? Something happened in his career on this day. I got a couple of hours before I have to crash out and sleep for work. Why not? Why not, indeed? And then I spent way too long making these graphics last minute. I say last minute, last hours, trying to type it all up, but it's all good. Now I have them. Once I obviously double check the numbers and make sure I didn't make any mistakes, I'll have them just to use at will. Yes, Surrealist. Time travel in this era would be weird, although I'd be glad to get back. There's a lot of cool shit that didn't even exist at this time that I've come to count on. Ross Cloud, you ain't kidding, man. Jack Blackburn's face says war. It really does. Let me put that one up on the screen. Boom. Yeah, even if you took the scar away, but the scar adds to it. He's like, if you peel back my face there, undo the zipper and peel back my face, and I'm scowling at you underneath too. This guy's, he was serious, but he was actually serious. It's not just a look. Some people have like a hard looking face and they're actually like really nice and gentle. He was a real hard man. He didn't fuck around. And I guess his brother, I'm assuming maybe his brother Fred, who was also a boxer, but he got an argument with the brother, slashed his face. And he told the authorities, oh, it was just an argument, disagreement. He was like, he was crazy tough. You could, but a lot of the guys had some extra, I guess. Pretty volatile character. It's quite amazing that from his coaching produced this everyman Joe Louis, man of the people, kind of like humble warrior, legend type character. But like his coach was the hardest of the hard. He'll cut you. Oh, that's funny, Rasclot. Yeah, a lot of the fighters today, quite photogenic, but also I think that's taking, the schedule doesn't like carve their faces up. And they're a lot more selective. So like if those guys today, even with the larger gloves, even with the mouthpiece, even with, better just technology in general and training facilities, if you put them in this schedule, like let them get ready today, then stick them in a time machine, go back, in 15 fights into the year, they're going to be feeling it. And maybe they need the money because they're back in this time. And so when the year ends, they just go straight into the next year. We can divide it by years, but there's no extra time off. They fight just late December and then early January. They're back in. Steve Cirillo says back then the money really kept the sport thriving, so all local clubs could fund themselves by admission sales. Exactly. When television got big, most of that money left the clubs. Yeah, the live gate era was fantastic for at least a certain level of boxers to be able to stay busy as they wanted to be. And what's funny though, people, is that on actually Joseph, I don't know if he ever hold the like a colored title. I don't think he actually. I don't know if he made a claim of one. I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up. I don't want to. I don't want to just improv. I really have no idea, to be honest. But I lost my train of thought. Well, it's not important. Yeah, I agree, Ross. That's a. Oh yeah, that's right. You were talking about the clubs. Yeah, the club scene in this time. I mean, guys wanted to. If you want to stay hella busy, there are places all over. Like Langford, I'm gonna pull up his. Oh, that's right. I don't have the clubs on this particular version of the graphic. Well, that's okay. I'm gonna pull it up anyway. Let's pull up Langford's '03. Oh yeah, I do have the clubs on there. The Essex Club had just started the year before. I don't know if it was renamed from another club or if it was from scratch. A lot of times these clubs would just come out as a new club. They're, or the same club would change buildings, or they wouldn't have a regular building. It was the membership was the same, but they would rent buildings for the thing. There's lots of different formats, but he was a lot at the Essex Club at this time. But he was based in the Lenox Club. He's fighting there. But he also fought at the West End. There were two. Lawrence, Massachusetts is just like an industrial town north of the city. There were two separate athletic clubs just in Lawrence. There was like the Lawrence AC and there's the West End AC in Lawrence. Just to give a sense, like that's not even a big place. They had two different fight clubs in the same industrial town. But he fought at the Cambridge AC. The Criterion had a lot of big fights. In fact, that Larry Temple, Joe Walcott title fight was at the Criterion, and I'm pretty sure, yep, Langford fought Gans at the Criterion AC. He fought at the Central AC, the American AC, the Sandersville AC in Situate, Rhode Island, the Gloucester Athletic Club. This is madness, but was available to him. He fought in Chelsea, Massachusetts, Sadler Jennings. I'm not sure what the venue was for that. Billy Chisholm, the second fight of the year in Lawrence. I don't know the venue for that either. I didn't find a record myself of it. It's on BoxRec and it's in cyber, but I'm not sure who reported it or why I couldn't find the clipping. But it might be. I got to find out if the Boston Journal is actually in the archive, the two archive subscriptions, the conglomerate archives that I subscribe to. Maybe it isn't. That might explain why a couple things I didn't see. It would be good to find that out if I'm trying to know as much as there is to know. That's available at least. I should probably sort that out. Yeah, Ross, that's a good point. Let me throw that up on the screen. That's a good point. Well, I think also like pay-per-view, like it's walling it off in a way that's maybe not advantageous just for the sustaining the sport, the fandom. Like it's hard now to see some really good high-level stuff without shelling out a bunch of money. I remember when I was a kid, they'd have just like fights on TV. Be like, oh look, it's like Lennox Lewis and stuff. Although I don't actually know the conditions. I was actually young enough for some of the fights. I'm not sure about Lewis, like Bruno, and some of the guys on TV. I'm not sure actually if anyone was paying for it at the time or what the deal was. I didn't really care about it, but I just remember seeing it once in a while and be like, oh, look at the big guys fighting. I think, yeah, it's just changed. Like the TV era was good for it, but pay-per-view sort of locks it off and makes it more exclusive. Mixed martial arts has done that too. I watch Bellator. I pay for Showtime, but it's not that much a month. I get all the Bellator fights. The UFC, I don't buy their pay-per-views. There's no way. And because I can't watch their best fights, I don't watch the rest. I'm just like, you kind of walling that off for me. I don't really care. Hey, what's up, Andre? Joseph says, speaking of Joe Gans, once Redwood Chappie tried to mold Joe Louis style after Joe Gans. That would not be a shock at all. I mean, Gans was the dude. Langford said he was the dude. Great Benny Leonard said he was the dude. So lots of people acknowledge Joe Gans as something extra special, just like they had for like George Dixon, Barbados Walcott, some of these select upper level legends like Langford. But Gans was really one of those guys. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he was trying to create like a really giant version of Gans. But also, like, I know some of that stuff that wanted him to be able to hit like Langford as well, because Langford was somebody who'd actually gone up and done it at heavyweight, but like being able to hit from any distance, that was something Langford had down. So yeah, like Blackburn had been around this such a high level of fighting for so long and had so much of his own. He's really like I don't know if he's totally unique. Other fighters have become trainers, but I don't know if there was a fighter as great as him who became a trainer as great as him. So I think there are guys. I mean, there are lots of fighters who've gone on to be powerful trainers, but I'm not sure because Blackburn, as a fighter, he has a great career. But as a coach, I mean, a lot of people I would think have Joe Louis as a top two all time heavyweight. Maybe only Muhammad Ali is the guy who's more often thought of as the best ever for good reason. I mean, we're talking about Muhammad Ali, but Joe Louis is right there and still holds some records today, which is crazy. Generations later, he still holds some records. So yeah, I mean, Blackburn as a coach, it maybe not like the amount of people he trained isn't as high as others, but the quality there. Oh, I like that, Joseph. Jack Johnson said Gans moved so well, it was like he was on wheels. That's hilarious. Yeah, Gans he was something extra special, and that's partly why it kind of set a lot of people's hair on fire that Langford was able to get the best of him in '03. He was so great that even considering he had fought the day before against Dave Holly, they didn't actually take away from Langford's win because Gans was the kind of dude who did fight a crazy schedule. I saw one article in the paper for that year. They had 4 fights announced for Gans over the next couple weeks. They're like, so Gans fighting here and here, and then he's fighting here in private, and then he's fighting here, and they're looking at matching him here. It's like, and he's the champion. So we think about the champions, how long they take to book. He was just packing it in, even if they weren't all title fights, putting like $2,500 or something as a side bet and things like that. You know, Gans and his manager Al Hereford, they know how to make money. And Hereford ran the Eureka, I think it was the Eureka Athletic Club in Baltimore. So like Langford, at least until things changed in '04 in Boston, but Langford had that home base of the Lenox in '03, and Gans had that home base of the Eureka and his manager. So they both had powerful managers, which helped. Joe Walcott, Barbados Walcott, for a long time, not his whole career, but for a long time, Tom O'Rourke was his manager, another powerhouse manager. It helped to be hooked up. It wasn't, young Peter Jackson, who I mentioned, is up for the Hall. He was also in that camp with Joe Gans. He was his corner and his main sparring partner, is my understanding. Al Hereford was his manager too, was plugged in. Some of these guys who got opportunities, there's a reason they got them. They weren't just good. Being hooked up allowed them to maintain the schedule that then being good enough within that schedule allowed them to get their opportunity. But it's not random. Langford wasn't floating around. He was, he's getting instruction from guys like George Byers, Jimmy Walsh. Actually, I wonder if who was it? Who else did I see on that Hall of Fame ballot? I wonder if it was Jimmy Walsh. I saw a few names I recognized from this time period. I was like, oh shit. I think one of the Sullivan twins might have even been on there. I gotta look again. I should have made that graphic. That's inexcusable. But like I was saying with Langford, he was plugged in. So he was in the right time, the right place at the right time, but also ended up hooked up with the right manager, someone who understood his capabilities and packed it in. And he was in this framework, at least for '03, when all the club scene was at its peak. It seems like it was a great year for the sport in Boston. But then '04, a little different. Schedule changes, fighting more regionally. Boston, I believe it by that time, like a little ways into '04, the police are cracking down. And so the conditions change a little bit. But, so it's okay though. He can go fight Philly, he can fight New Hampshire. He still gets his thing on. but the types of fights you can have in Boston changes. You can see he's in. So after Charlie Johnson, the exhibition, I guess, on the 13th February, he goes to New Bedford, Massachusetts, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Manchester, New Hampshire, for Albos McFadden, then also Barbados Joe Walcott. Then he's in Baltimore fighting Dave Holly. I'm assuming at Al Hereford's club, fighting Philadelphia's Dave Holly, but fighting at Gann's home base. Then he's in Philly. Dave Holly, I'm not sure if Dave Holly had a home club, like a manager who ran a club, because that wasn't uncommon at the time. That wasn't at all uncommon at the time. So I'm not sure who Dave Holly was hooked up with. I'll have to research that in time for one of the anniversary fights for this series. But he's fighting his home thing. Then Andy Watson in Webster, Mass., another of his early career opponents, Professor. Tommy Sullivan. It says 12 rounds. I feel like he fought Tommy Sullivan twice, but why am I feeling that way? For some reason, I feel like that result is wrong against Sullivan. I'm either confusing him with a different opponent, or Tommy Sullivan was a welterweight who did not last the distance. He got his ass kicked. That would be embarrassing. I wonder if I have an alternate graphic for 04 that has the actual. All right, I'm going to have to go try and fact check myself in real time. But for some reason, I feel like he stopped Tommy Sullivan in 04. What do I have on this? Yeah, okay. So I don't have a good work ethic for graphics, but I do have a decent memory. I'm getting a sense of this schedule. So yeah, look, he stopped Tommy Sullivan in 3. He was a welterweight, and I think he was undefeated at that point. Now Tommy Sullivan, want to take over the welterweight. After that fight, the papers, I remember because they were real harsh on him. They were like, well, he knocked his aspirations into a cocked hat or something like that. I forget the actual term. They used some old-timey, like dashed his hopes type term. But again, that's another fight. Langford, his first season at welterweight, smacking around an undefeated welterweight prospect, no problem. Doesn't even register, because this same year he's fighting like someone who's like more known, like Andy Watson, or someone who's like much better, like Dave Holly, or connected like Barbados Walcott, or has a better win like Albos McFadden, had some really good wins, or Willie Lewis, who went on to be more. Jack Blackburn, who's famous for another reason. Like, so something like the win over Tommy Sullivan, even though that's a good win. I'm trying to remember what town he was from. I feel like it was Lynn, Massachusetts, on the North Shore. I'll have to look that up. But well, we'll get to that in November. I'll have a thing for that fight, because I've done a little graphic and Facebook post on that before. I'm glad. It's gratifying, even though my other graphic is wrong. And I seriously, before I do another show, I need to go and find out which ones of these have errors. I think when I went into my folders to upload some specifically to this folder in StreamYard, I think I went to the wrong folder, and some stuff I should have deleted before. Because but anyway. So at least I did have on the much cooler looking graphic here that has their pictures. Don't have. I feel like, okay, so I also feel like I found a picture of Tommy Sullivan. I'm almost positive of it. But I must have been after I made this graphic. You know what? I will update that for the next time I talk about something that happened in 04. If not, or November 25th on the latest, I'm going to dig that picture up, because I have more information than before. Sorry to be live on air and be like, my graphics are totally inadequate. Joseph says, once a boxer held the title, he could really make money. Yeah, I mean, especially the heavyweight champion. But yeah, these guys had options. Depends on the fighter too. But at heavyweight, yeah, once you had the title, just showing up places, you can make money just showing up places to talk, exhibition, sparring, all kinds of stuff. Or doing wagers like, okay, if you can last 4 rounds, we'll bet $250 if you can last 4 rounds with me, or something like that. Guys would do that back in the day. They're probably still doing around this time. Little challenge. I think Jeffries was doing a lot of that. If you can stay 4 rounds, you win the wager. But they're probably selling tickets to it, so there's more money involved than just that. Lots of ways to make money. So anyway, I think, man, it's an hour and 20 minutes. These shows are being long, but it's also now that I'm getting more and more charts, I'm having more and more fun talking about all this mess. Like I only had Blackburn's 1903 for a live stream I did with Josh City from 86 Boxing. So I already had his '03, although I redid it. No, I didn't redo it. Oh, that's funny. I redid it earlier today and then didn't upload the new graphic. I'm on a roll here. My goodness. But this one I had to do from scratch. This one do from scratch. Now that's really going to bother me. I did that whole graphic. That was probably an extra 15 minutes of prep time. And then I didn't upload it. Genius. Hey, what's up, Joe? Welcome, welcome. Oh, I was just getting ready to wrap up. I'll keep going a little bit for you, man, just because I'm so happy you're here. Just been talking about no contest. The sixth battle between Sam Langford. The first three meetings they had were draws. The fourth meeting, Langford won on points. Fifth one was a draw, and this sixth one was a no contest. Stopped in either 1 or 4 rounds, but stopped at some point by the ref for not being busy enough. I have to probably should have researched a little more, but I just didn't have a lot of time. I worked all night. I've been up for 1,000 years. It feels like it was a good fight. Let me flash these wonderful clipped photos two of my favorites I found in the newspaper. The one on the left I've seen before online. The one on the right I personally hadn't seen before. I saw it in the paper. And I think I saw it in the Globe or the Post. I had to take that thing. Look at that. Babyface. There's obviously the 1905 babyface Jeanette. This one here, can't remember where I saw it, Facebook or what, but like that Jack Blackburn picture is fantastic on the left. Paired that with the Larry Temple. Very underrated Larry Temple. I don't think a great fighter is a way to describe him, but he was a handful and fought a lot at high level. Sometimes hard to get some of these guys, like with a better bringing up, they may have had even better career, but not everyone has that luxury. Like Langford, even he had a support structure, but so even though he came from poverty and came from hard, like manual labor and not really having a support structure around him, once he got plugged in, he was doing pretty good. I mean, from what he said later in the 20s, he was living in the Lennox Club for a time until he got his own spot in Cambridge. So, he was living the dream. That's like sleeping in the rehearsal building as a musician. I've been there. Go to sleep to the sound of someone up there in the drum room, and then you wake up and just crank the music up, man. Drown their shit out with your own. You get right back to it. Langford was kind of like really living it. He was really grinding. He certainly wasn't the only one, though. We saw Blackburn have a spectacular 1903. Joe Gans had a great 1903. Dave Hawley had a great 1903. Honey Melody had a great 1903. Lots of these dudes had these crazy, crazy years. Oh, hey, Joseph. I've seen that before, but I'd heard it the other way around. That it was Johnson wanted to go fight in the basement. Jeffries. I could be wrong though. Actually, now that I'm second guessing myself, I shouldn't be correcting you if I don't even know. My first instinct was I heard that the other way around, but now that I'm not sure. Yeah, because maybe it was it that Johnson wanted to fight, and he's like, we can go settle it, and he's like, no, dude, that makes at least as much sense. I gotta look that story up. Thanks for putting that, man. Thanks for sharing that. Sorry, I immediately doubted you. My instincts are often wrong, but now I'm all high on myself because I called that Tommy Sullivan fight. I was like, that's wrong, and then I found out it was. So now I think I'm freaking Nostradamus and shit. Joe says, and think they did all this in that time. Australia, Canada, Brazil. Yep. Did they fight him? I don't know if Langford fought in Brazil. I know he fought in Mexico, he fought in Panama, fought in France, England, Canada, US. Where else did he fight? Man, he fought some places. And some of those years for Langford, he's traveling back and forth, so he's not just like this is one of my favorite seasons of Langford's. Starts off the year in Boston, Massachusetts, then he goes to upstate New York. I think Utica is in upstate New York. Like New York City is like for those of y'all who aren't like American or familiar, like New York City is the concrete jungle, but upstate New York is completely rural. Is it like a lot of it's in rural, other than a few industrial cities, but so Boston, then upstate New York. The point being, that's more of a trip in this time than it would be to go to New York, which itself wasn't an insignificant trip either. So it goes Boston, upstate New York, London, England, Paris, France. That's all by April. Then he's back in New York. Then he goes up to Canada for a fight. Then he does a run in New York, but he closed out the year in Australia. What the hell, Sam Langford? That's crazy. Consider that would actually be really respectable today if you could just fly it. Like if a boxer did this, all those countries in a year and all those fights, you'd be like, yo, all right, man, that's some legend shit. He was doing this on boats and trains and things, just madness. But I think I'm gonna go ahead and call the show. I think that's an adequate amount of time. I'm not sure when the next. I guess before I go, the last thing I'll do is I'll pull up the graphic that I threw together that has the anniversaries, the October anniversaries. We'll see what's next. The 9th. Oh my goodness, is one of the 1912 fights. I think that's the third, either the third or fourth time they met in the 1912 season. Sam Langford and the great Sam McVeigh. Oh, we're gonna get it on. That is gonna be quite a show. I gotta pull up a picture of McVeigh to close the show out with. Since I got tomorrow off, so I got tomorrow to do up my McVeigh graphics. I don't have his whole career done. Oh, but I don't have his 1912. But check this out. Here's McVeigh's 02 through 04. Started the same year as Langford, although they both started in 02, but they didn't actually fight until 1911. But they got 15 in before it was all over. 06, 07, and then in 08, McVeigh hits his stride, The only loss in 09, 49 rounds to the great Joe Jeanette, one of the greatest fights of all time. Look at this, 1910 undefeated, 1911 undefeated, including a win over Langford. That's an epic, one of the great wins of this era. Someone getting the best of Langford over 20 rounds. I'll do up his 1912. I'll see you guys in 2 days. Can't wait. And I appreciate everyone joining me. And just hope you have a good one, folks. Oh, here we go. It's a picture of the guys themselves. All right, well, have a great day. And yeah, Joe, great having you here, man. Yeah, both Sam's McVeigh and Langford, they're relatively recent for me as well, at least the last several years. But yeah, I really got into it. And the more I study, the more interested I am. So we'll be back in 2 days, folks. I'm not sure if I have any kind of other subject going between now and then, but certainly 2 days, probably 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. We'll be talking about let's see, it would be I think the fifth fight between these two overall, because they fought twice in 1911. I think this is the third fight of 1912. Don't quote me on that. All right, well, have a great day, y'all. Take care.